Walking Jangama and sitting in Samadhi Bhāvanā are ways of analyzing and searching for that which is real and essential, saraguna, within oneself. This is very important work, with results that are beyond all one's expectations and far greater than any other work that one can do. So one should not let the kilesas, dharna, and avidya play about and deceive one into seeing it as work which tricks one into loss and ruin with no good results at all. For in truth it is the kilesas themselves which do just this, and they are what always lead people and other beings to destruction and ruin if they have been deceived by their tricks and methods until they no longer think about themselves. The analysis of the chitta by means of Samadhi Bhāvanā means the analysis of oneself into the various parts of which one is composed, so as to find out which is true and which is false, which leads one towards dukkha and which towards sukha, which leads to hell and which to heaven, and which leads one towards nibbana, the final and complete end of all dukkha. These important things which each and every one of us will have to face up to are not the business of the Lord Buddha or of any of the Savakas, nor yet that of the Buddha Sasana, that it should be advertising them so as to get people to believe and have faith in them, so that they should be anxious and concerned about the results that may come from them. For these three supreme Dhammas, i.e. Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, are complete and perfect as they always have been, and there is not the least part of any of them which anybody or anything can diminish or spoil. That task therefore comes down to each one of us who must face up to that which is important right there in front of one, and each one of us should search for the way to avoid and evade and escape from these kilesas with the utmost mindfulness, strength, and ability that each of us is capable of, so that we may get free from them bit by bit. We should not just sit or lie down, idly waiting for all these fearful things, without any thought or consideration for them at all, as if we were pigs just waiting for the day when we will be killed and chopped up, meanwhile contentedly nosing about in the chaff and bran husk, because they only think about their mouths and stomachs and nothing else. But there are enormous differences between human beings and animals who are incapable of rational and reflective thought. So we should certainly never let go of ourselves so that our bodies and minds become involved in behavior that is the way of animals. For the minds of animals know nothing of things that have lasting value. The only things that suit them are garlic and onions. In writing the foregoing, it is not my intention to blame and criticize all those good and reasonable people by means of the Dhamma that I have expounded, but rather to help them to promote the development of their chitta, bodily action, and speech, which have been thrown down into the mud and mire by these loathsome, filthy kilesas that have usurped them and turned them to their own use, and have thus become the master butcher, chopping them up for food which they find delicious in their various ways. Also to arouse mindfulness and wisdom in these people, so that they may know what the nature of their present state is. Then to try by using these ways and methods, which should be enough to help them and to get them out of danger from these things to some extent, so that they may rightly be called Buddhists. A good way for them to come to understand their present state is by training themselves in Samadhi Bhāvanā, for by this method they should come to understand their state more easily than any other way, because this work takes place within themselves, it acts within themselves, and their thoughts about the ways of the world, of people and beings, takes place directly within themselves. Right and wrong, good and evil, happiness and discontent are all there within themselves, so that the more they ponder these things, the more they come to know about themselves. When they know themselves, they must also know about the discontent, dukkha, which is part and parcel of themselves. Then, day by day, the chitta will become clearer and more apparent, and its value will increase, much in the way that goods in the world can become more expensive and valuable. Anybody who often trains himself to think and to interpret what he finds in himself will know how to evade and avoid dukkha. He will not then go about gathering it and accumulating it all the time as he has done in the past. As for seeing the danger in the dukkha which is within himself, the day will come when he will see it continually, and he will have the way to evade and avoid this danger time after time, and he will steadily become more and more free from it. In seeing dukkha, he will see it within himself every time it arises in him, and also in overcoming dukkha he will know how he has overcome it in himself by the power of his samadhi, sati, and panya. As for the dukkha connected with life and death, and what he will become in future lives, however many they may be that he will have to face up to, he is not concerned or anxious, because the nature of all of them is collected within his experience in the khandhas, which are before him right now, and which have been taken in and known by this one heart which is at present training and correcting itself. But while he lives he will be peaceful and calm in heart, due to the value and virtue of Dhamma which he has within him, and when he dies he will have a state of happiness, sugato, to enjoy. This is the result which comes from doing samadhi and walking Cankama Bhāvanā. It can cause those who practice it to become cheerful and courageous, beyond what anyone would normally ever expect, so it is something which we should do for our own sakes. We should not be careless or indifferent to it, which may turn out to be more dangerous to us than we ever expected. In fixing the citta and setting up mindfulness while walking Cankama, one should do so properly and well, which is the way it should be for the intention and purpose of searching for virtue. For walking Cankama Bhāvanā is the search for virtue which is a correct path, which is not at all blameworthy, and throughout the world the wisest sages all praise it. One should go on trying to make one's citta become calm in this way until one succeeds, but one should not do it by merely going through the motions. Then one will come to see the excellence and wonder that belongs to oneself. This is the citta which has been covered and wrapped up by such worthless rubbish that one has had no interest in the citta, believing only that the one which is wrapped up in this rubbish is no more important than the worthless rubbish which surrounds it. This tends to lead us into delusion about these things until we forget to think about ourselves. But the truth and the renown of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha spread throughout the triple world, and all of it came just from the heart, which was both the cause of them and the wonderful result, as we have mentioned before. In other words, the heart which has gone away free from all this worthless rubbish is called the Buddha or the Sangha, depending on who it is that we are talking about. But when the person has gone, there remains only Dhamma and nothing else. For there is nothing that remains that we can distinguish as the Citta or the Lord Buddha, both of which are suppositional or relative sammuti conditions of the highest kind in these three worlds. There remains only what we call Dhamma, and this word is also suppositional, and of the highest. But it is necessary to retain these words as the basic symbols for those in the world who hope for Dhamma as their refuge, until they have got there and no longer need to hope for anything at all. What we call Dhamma and the person then know each other, and there is no room left for him to doubt, even though he may have never known it in the past. Because of this, the word citta means the same thing for that person as it does for ourselves and for everyone throughout the world. But those things which make the cittas of people so different from one another in ways that are so incredibly varied that one cannot imagine or guess the whole of it in human society are the kilesas. Because the environments in which people live, which are many and varied beyond description, enter into association and interact with them. Then the citta which is subjected to these things is covered by them, and so mixed in with them that they are bound together as one. The citta then becomes entirely different and unrecognizable, so that it is almost impossible to know what the true characteristics of the citta are, apart from all these things which obscure it and wrap it up entirely and make it indistinguishable from them. And this also makes it impossible to prove what past births and lives the citta of any person has come from. Those things which obscure it and wrap it up more than anything else are all what are called kilesas, or the refuse that has been thrown away by all those who are the most excellent acharyas. So those who endeavor to wash out and cure those things which are mentioned above, and to get rid of them to some extent, are sure to gain the reward of increased happiness to an extent that depends on the causes they have done in cleansing them away. If they have been washed out to the point where purity has been attained, that person will have reached the end of all dukkha of heart while he is still in the midst of his khandhas which he is looking after. This refers to people such as the Lord Buddha and the Arahants, who became enlightened and attained Dhamma of which they partook and tasted, as they also did with the joy of freedom, vimutti sukha, at the same moment, without its having any reference to the time or place at all. The only requirement was, and still is, for the kilesas, the fundamental enemy of the chitta, to be brought to an end, to be completely extinguished and got rid of. This is all that is required. So it follows that it is only the kilesas and nothing else that blocks the way to the path, fruition, and nibbana, and prevents the chitta from reaching them, and there is no other thing, person, or whatever else that has any power to block them. It is therefore necessary in teaching Dhamma to teach the way to get down to the chitta, which is where all the kilesas congregate, by the practical application of Dhamma. This means the practice of Sila, Samadhi, and Paññā, which are the major factors in all forms of Dhamma concerned with curing and eliminating them. Walking meditation is one of the many ways to make the kilesas disperse from the heart, as are the many other methods, such as sitting in Samadhi Bhāvanā. One should therefore take an interest in training oneself in these ways, and start doing it from now on. This is like work which one does in the world for one's livelihood, and which provides one with stature in human society where it is respected. But the work of doing what is good and virtuous, such as walking chankama, which we have already explained, is the work of uplifting oneself both internally and externally. This work also uplifts one's fellow human beings in this world as well as animals, in accordance with the strength of virtue of the bhikkhu or layperson to spread happiness about so that the world can receive it, more or less as the case may be. For example, each and every one of the Buddhas was able to spread the cool shade of peace throughout the three worlds to an enormous extent, and nobody else can equal them in this. Each of the Arahants were also able to spread peace to the world to a large extent in place of the Buddhas, and their abilities in this was much greater than that of ordinary people. However, there are also good and gentle people who are in positions of authority in the world, and whose strength of virtuous characteristics are quite great, and they do many things to help and be of value to people in general. The people then esteem and respect them and exalt them as the highest, like their own fathers and mothers, and they love them in the same way as they do their own parents. The more there are of such good people, the more does it indicate a state of progress and development in that group or society. The sasana, the way of Buddhism, and those who teach Dhamma to help the world in various ways, without thinking about or expecting any material reward or remuneration, are people who make others glad at heart. They are full of metta as a state of dwelling in Dhamma, metta vihara Dhamma, and they are faithful to the people who look up to them and never get tired of them or feel that they have had enough. At all times the people also think of them and praise them with reverence as shining examples. Wherever they go, they never do any harm to the world, but instead go about helping others, making everybody so glad at heart at the same time. The sasana and those who give help to the world, the former by means of Dhamma and the latter by material aid, are like a doctor and nurse who have compassion and metta, always dispensing medicine and looking after the diseases of their fellows, whose lives depend on these medicines and the doctors. Even when they have been cured of their sicknesses, their gratitude will never let them forget such kindness and virtue. This is the power of virtue which is independent of race, class, or nationality, and is something which all desire. Virtue and the sasana are not therefore things which are old-fashioned and out of date, as some people think nowadays, despite the fact that they also want to rely on others with a longing for the metta and generous kindness of all those who are big-hearted. For the sasana is where good people are made, and the sasana is the field of all that is good and virtuous. If a person is not good and virtuous, it is quite impossible for him to teach the way of the sasana to others in the world. The basis of the sasana is the hearts of good people as an absolute minimum requirement. Beyond that, it reaches up to the hearts of those who have complete Dhamma purity and liberation throughout, such as the great teacher, the Sasada, of the Buddha Sasana. Where could we find anyone else so considerate and capable? Who else would be prepared to make a sacrifice for their fellows like the hearts of the founders of the Sasana who brought forth Dhamma to teach the world? A complete sacrifice such as was made by all the Buddhas and the Savaka Arahants who followed each of the Buddhas who gave help to the people. If they had been people whose hearts were not perfectly clean and pure and free from all selfishness, they would never have been able to sacrifice everything for the sake of the world. This is something that is not difficult for me to accept and to have complete faith in, and even if nobody else accepted it, I would still be prepared to go on being a fool who has faith in it, because each one of us has been born into this world and lived in it long enough to know the meanness and generosity, the selfishness and magnanimity of our fellow human beings quite well enough, for all of us in our different ways live in the same world. Our sorrows and happiness, the ups and downs of life, are all linked together the whole time in a way that is quite inseparable, and it is impossible for us to be unaware of this fact that is there between each and all of us. We are bound to be aware of it. Those who are tired of their situation and hate each other do so because of knowing about each other. Those who love each other, who are glad to be together and trust each other implicitly, do so because they know about each other. The teaching of the Sasana, which each of the great teachers, the Buddhas, initiated, shook up the universe, because it roused up and encouraged the hearts of all beings, waking them out of their sleep in which they had been satisfied to live amongst the mass of kilesas. The wheel of Dhamma, Dhammacakra, woke them up, turning out the Arya Satya, the most noble and excellent truths. How then could the one who proclaimed these truths not be known for what he truly was, and with what characteristics he was endowed when he proclaimed them? If he was not endowed with metta of the highest quality flowing out to the world, I don't know how I could explain them to the satisfaction of the reader. If the Lord Buddha and his followers had been like all of us who, if we search and look into ourselves, into our hearts, see nothing but meanness and selfishness so that we cannot get along with other people, the Sasana and the great teacher, the Sasada, would never have arisen, nor would there have been any cause for the world to pay homage and reverence to them as the highest ideal. The fact is that the world is still the world, and there are both good and evil people mixed together in it, and it is not devoid of wise people and sages arising from the human race. This is because it has been under the influence of the pure and clean hearts of those who are completely unselfish, and who fear that there are others more worthy than themselves to bring up and pacify people with the Dhamma teaching of the Sasana. So there are still some good people in the world. One should not assume that it is easy to be born as a human being and not easy to die. But there may be forms of birth in which birth is easy and death is also easy, and others in which birth may be difficult and death easy, like animals everywhere. This is because life exists by means of the elements, dhatu and khandhas in all cases. As soon as the breath stops, their continuity ceases, and this just means that a person or animal dies. What more can one say? Where can we find enough permanence and stability so that we can afford to be careless and self-forgetful, without thinking or learning enough about ourselves to act as good tendencies of character, sugati nisaya, to lead us into the future?